Armed enforcers hired by the HOA smashed into a veteran's home, all because his backyard fence didn't fit the guidelines. Karen, the HOA president, twisted community rules into a tool of control, punishing anyone who dared to stand out. But when 10-year-old Tyler stepped forward to defend his father, everything changed in a moment no one saw coming. And just wait until you hear how this explosive confrontation turned into a powerful fight for justice for a town, and how it all came full circle. Saturday started like any other. The hum of the fridge, the slow creak of the screen door, the familiar clink of metal as David Wilson adjusted the backyard gate, a project he'd tinkered with all week. Inside, his 10-year-old son Tyler sat at the kitchen island, crunching through a bowl of cinnamon cereal, the kind that leaves your milk glowing tan. Sunlight filtered lazily through the blinds. The TV was off. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the sound, deep, sharp, wrong. Not thunder, not a dropped tool. Something closer to a crack and a roar. Glass exploded inward, jagged shards scattered across the floor like confetti at a parade no one wanted. Tyler flinched, the spoon clattering from his hand. His breath caught in his throat. 3 men charged through the front window in tactical vests, shouting over each other. HOA enforcement. Step aside. No badges, no police markings. Just black gloves, military-style boots, and a thin sheet of paper one of them waved like a flag. Tyler's first thought was, are we being robbed? But robbers don't announce themselves. David heard the commotion and came sprinting in from the yard, hands up, voice raised. Hey, what are you doing? This is my home. They didn't slow down. One grabbed him by the arm, spinning him toward the ground. Another stepped over the broken glass, shouting something about fence code violations and unauthorized modifications. Tyler froze. Every instinct told him to hide, but then he saw his dad, face down, hand pinned behind his back, struggling to breathe, and something inside Tyler lit up like a spark on dry grass. He turned and bolted for the den, his heart pounding like drum beats in his ears. The gear cabinet was still open from last night. David had been cleaning it, talking to Tyler about safety, respect, responsibility. The words echoed in his mind. He reached for the rifle, hands trembling, muscles tight. It felt heavier than he thought it would. Tyler didn't load it. He didn't aim it. He didn't even raise it high. He just stepped back into the living room, past the cereal, past the shards of glass, and said the only thing that came to mind, "Get off him now." His voice cracked halfway through, but it was loud enough. Everything stopped. No one moved. No one shouted. The air felt still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Tyler's grip tightened, not from anger, from fear, but he stood between the chaos and his dad, not as a threat, but as a barrier, as a line that should not have been crossed. In that moment, the 10-year-old with bare feet and bit head became something more, not a boy with a rifle, but a son standing guard. And for the first time that morning, the house was silent again. 17 minutes. That's how long it took for real officers to arrive. Uniformed, trained, equipped. But 17 minutes in a crisis can feel like an entire lifetime stretched thin. By then, the damage had already been done. The HOA security team, 3 men in tactical gear without official authority, were standing near the front door, their bravado drained, their postures suddenly cautious. Their hands hovered in the air just enough to say, "We're not resisting." David sat on the living room floor, propped up against the wall like a broken statue. His shirt was torn near the shoulder. A visible scrape marked the side of his head. Blood had dried in a line that reached just past his jaw. He wasn't saying anything, just watching his son. Tyler was still standing menace 10 years old, barefoot in pajama pants with little rockets on them. His arms were wrapped around the rifle like it was a life preserver in rough seas. The barrel pointed down. His fingers weren't near the trigger. He remembered that rule. He remembered all the rules. But rules don't protect you when people don't listen. And no one seemed to be listening. Then, finally, sirens. The kind that cut through silence like knives. Blue and red lights painted the walls of the house, flickering over the broken glass. The front door flew open. Drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them. Step away." Tyler flinched as two officers rushed toward him. He didn't argue, didn't move fast, just slowly released the rifle and let it slip from his hands, metal clanging faintly against the hardwood floor. He raised his arms, palms out. One officer gently guided him backward and out the door. Another scooped up the rifle. A third moved toward David, who was still dazed, trying to explain something, anything, but the officer had already pulled out the cuffs. The world outside was spinning faster than anyone could control. On the sidewalk, half the neighborhood had gathered, some watching quietly, others recording. A woman on her phone streamed live, narrating with shallow breath and wide eyes. "They just brought the dad out. Oh my God. And the kid. Yeah, that's him. That's the one with the gun. He looks so small. This is crazy." Tyler was placed in the back seat of a squad car, no cuffs, but the door still locked from the outside. Through the window he could see the flash of cameras. He spotted his neighbor across the street, the one who always gave him extra popsicles in summer, holding up her phone and shaking her head. Not one of them came closer. No one asked if he was okay. In those minutes, the headlines were already writing themselves. 10-year-old points rifle at HOA security. Armed child in domestic dispute. No mention of the shattered window. No mention of the unannounced intrusion. No mention of the fence. No one seemed to care that the security officers weren't police, just hired muscle with matching jackets and printed papers. No one cared that Tyler never aimed, never threatened, never shouted anything except "stop." The story was already on a different track, one that no one in the Wilson family had chosen. And Tyler, sitting alone in that car, hands in his lap, knees pressed together, could already feel it. The world didn't see a scared kid. They saw a headline. The internet didn't sleep. It never does. By the end of the first day, clips of Tyler standing in the living room, barefoot, holding the rifle, were stitched into hundreds of reaction videos, edits with dramatic music, red filters, bold captions. Within 48 hours, it had a name, #ARKid. Some said it stood for American resilience. Others said it was armed and reckless. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was that it spread. Cable news hosts debated it live. Morning shows invited psychologists and security experts to weigh in. The question wasn't whether the HOA acted legally. It was whether Tyler symbolized freedom or failure. "He's just a boy," some said. "He's dangerous," others warned. Neither side had spoken to Tyler. Meanwhile, the world around him shrank. He stopped going to school. It wasn't a choice. The school said it was for safety, but everyone knew why. Teachers didn't look him in the eye when his name was mentioned during morning meetings. The PTA called an emergency assembly. Some students sent him messages. "You good, man? My dad says you're a hero. You really going to bring that thing to school next?" Others weren't so kind. "Why'd you need a gun? You're a freak. You're going to end up on the news again." Tyler didn't answer any of them. He spent most days in his room, curtains closed, his favorite hoodie pulled up over his head even when it was warm. He didn't touch his game console. The Minecraft server he ran with his two best friends sat empty, the chat silent for days. What he missed most wasn't school or games. It was the way things used to be, the quiet rhythm of normal. His dad humming while cooking chili, the sound of distant lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, the moment right before bedtime when everything was still. But now the silence felt different, heavier. Then came the court notice. His mom, Melissa, who had divorced David 2 years earlier, filed for emergency custody. The filing claimed reckless exposure to firearms and emotional endangerment. Her voice, calm but firm on the phone, echoed in his mind. Tyler needs a stable environment. This wasn't stable. She wasn't wrong. But she didn't ask what he had seen, or how afraid he was when those men came in, or what it felt like to be 10 years old and have to choose between hiding and standing up. Tyler didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just sat on his bed, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the wall. He didn't want attention. He wasn't trying to make a statement or prove anything to anyone. He wanted to go back to the morning before it all happened, to sit with cereal and cartoons, to hear his dad laugh, to feel like a kid again. but now he was the kid with the gun, and nothing would ever feel normal again. The press conference was held on a manicured lawn behind iron gates, the kind of place where trouble was supposed to stay out, where lawns stayed even, mailboxes matched, and the silence was organized by design. Karen, president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, stood behind a podium draped in a crisp white cloth. To her left, a modest HOA flag. To her right, nothing, not even a hint of accountability. She adjusted her collar, smoothed her tie. A Rolex peeped from beneath her sleeve, catching the sun. Then she spoke. "We'd acted to enforce community standards. The Wilsons were non-compliant and hostile. We regret that the situation escalated, but we stand by our enforcement process." The reporters nodded. A few scribbled on notepads, but none raised their hands to ask the obvious. Why was there a team of private agents entering a residential home without a warrant? Why were those agents tied to a company registered in the name of Karen's cousin? Why did the HOA need uniforms and muscle to check fence heights? 3 months earlier, Karen had quietly rewritten sections of the HOA charter, adding new regulations against what she called military-style barriers. She claimed it was about aesthetic unity. Others saw it as something else, a personal crusade masquerading as policy. No community vote was held. No notices were sent out until the rules were already in place. Most residents didn't even know the new rules existed until the HOA began issuing citations. First came the warning letters, then the fines, then, in the Wilsons' case, something more aggressive. But Karen wasn't worried. She'd built this system carefully. HOAs weren't just neighborhood watch groups anymore. In some places, they had their own security forces, their own regulations, their own authority. In Willow Ridge, Karen had become more than a board president. She was an unelected mayor of a very small, very controlled kingdom. She knew how to work the optics. She knew that if you said community safety and compliance enough times, people would stop asking questions, especially when the cameras started looking elsewhere. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that someone had started asking questions. Not just neighbors quietly uncomfortable, not just outraged parents online, but someone who understood the system better than she did. Someone who had spent their career taking down organizations that hid behind fine print and technicalities. Karen smiled at the cameras, confident the storm had passed. She thought this was just another headline, one that would fade like all the others. She didn't realize the real story hadn't even started yet. It didn't go viral in the way cute dogs or celebrity slip-ups do. This spread like something people weren't sure how to process. Unease wrapped in outrage. Footage of a barefoot 10-year-old standing between his father and 3 armored men. Headlines couldn't agree on the tone, but the image spoke for itself. Somewhere deep in a Reddit thread titled "HOA Fascism Goes Too Far," one particular comment stood out. "Where's the legal line here? This feels wrong." That's where Sofia Martinez found it. Civil rights attorney, founder of Home Defense Now, former federal litigator turned community advocate. She'd made her name challenging overreach, from rogue landlords to private enforcers in gated communities. HOA power abuse wasn't new to her. But this case, this one was different. It wasn't just about codes or fences. It was about a child forced into a moment no child should face, and a veteran father punished for protecting the place he called home. Within 2 hours, Sophia was on the phone with David's sister Emma. 10 minutes later, she had David's file pulled, his charges reviewed, and a flight booked to Texas. She arrived the next morning, boots on the ground. Literally, cowboy boots. A crisp blue suit, binder under one arm. A look on her face that said she didn't need permission to be taken seriously. The holding facility was quiet that day. No cameras, no press. David sat across from her, shoulders heavy, eyes blank. He looked older than his age, worn, not weak, the kind of tired that comes from fighting too many battles alone. Sophia sat down. No small talk. No sales pitch. You served your country. You built a fence to keep your family safe. And now they want to label you a threat because you didn't fold when they told you to. Let me help you flip the script. David didn't respond right away. He'd dealt with lawyers before. Most of them talked big, left quick. He'd spent the last 72 hours watching everything unravel, unsure who to trust. But then Sophia pulled a folder from her binder. Inside, photos, citations, legal inconsistencies in HOA policy changes, Karen's cousin's security license, printouts of neighborhood complaints that had been ignored for years. "They broke the law," she said simply. "You didn't." David looked down, then past her through the glass into the hallway, where Tyler stood waiting with a guard. The boy looked tired but still standing. He remembered the moment in the living room, the fear, the quiet courage. He didn't know if he believed in winning anymore, but he believed in his son, and that was enough. He nodded once. Sophia smiled, the kind of smile that means the real fight is just beginning. Sophia didn't waste time. Less than a week after her visit, she filed a countersuit against the Willow Ridge HOA and its board president, Karen. The charges were clear and deliberate: unlawful entry, assault, emotional trauma, and defamation of character. The language was sharp, every sentence backed by documentation and precedent. There was no drama in her voice when she announced it, only precision. Then she filed the subpoenas: Karen's emails, HOA board records, property violation reports, and most importantly, the policy amendments made just 3 months earlier, the ones that allowed military-style fencing to be banned without so much as a neighborhood vote. On paper, it looked like a legal battle, but in reality, it was something else, a spark. Sophia launched a campaign alongside the lawsuit. Simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. #HoNotAboveLaw. The message spread like wildfire. It started small, a few reposts on niche forums and veteran Facebook groups. But then the right voice picked it up. A retired Marine turned podcaster. A parenting influencer with 1 million followers. A teacher in Arizona. A mother from Florida who shared her own HOA horror story. Suddenly, Tyler's face was everywhere, not as the boy with the weapon, but as the boy who stood up. People began to see the footage differently, slower, with sound on. They noticed the fear in his voice when he yelled for the men to stop. They noticed the way his hands shook, the way he stood between his father and something he didn't understand but knew was wrong. Veterans began speaking out. Parents, gun safety advocates, even HOA reform groups, the ones fighting for accountability from the inside, released statements of support. Sophia never asked Tyler to speak, but one night he agreed to do a single interview. No stage, no press tour, just a quiet sit-down in front of a camera, one microphone, and a simple question. "Why did you do it?" Tyler hesitated for a moment, eyes lowered. Then, in a voice that still sounded too small for the weight he carried, he said, "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted them to stop hurting my dad." That sentence alone traveled faster than anything else. News outlets clipped it. Commentators quoted it. Strangers reshared it with captions like, "This kid gets it," and "Bravery looks like this." At school, Tyler's inbox started to fill. The silence he carried for weeks began to crack. One message stood out. It was short, from a classmate who hadn't said a word since the story broke. "Sorry. You were right. No parade. No loud apology." But for Tyler, that one sentence felt like breathing again. The tide had turned, and now the story was theirs to tell. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than it should have. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, reporters, activists, former HOA members. Even a few students from Tyler's school sat near the back, clutching notebooks instead of phones. David Wilson sat quietly at the front table. His posture was straight, but the tension in his jaw betrayed everything. He hadn't said much that morning, just a quiet nod to Sophia and a brief glance at Tyler. That was enough. Across the aisle sat Karen, still in her blazer, still carrying that signature smirk. But today, the edges of her confidence were starting to fray. Her lawyer shuffled papers without purpose. Karen's forehead glistened under the courtroom lights. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began. Opening statements came and went. Sophia's was calm, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts were powerful enough. Then came witness testimonies. Neighbors recalling strange letters, finds that seemed to appear from nowhere, Rules changed without explanation. A former HOA board member, clearly nervous, admitted he hadn't even seen the policy changes until weeks after they were enacted. But the room shifted when Tyler walked to the stand. He wore a plain blue button-up and his best sneakers. Still looked like a kid, because he was. His hands trembled as he raised them to swear in. The courtroom watched in silence. Sophie approached slowly, gently. Her voice was steady. "Tyler, do you remember what happened the morning of the incident?" He nodded, lips pressed tight. Then, in halting words, he told them about the window, about the men shouting, about his dad on the floor, about the rifle, about the fear. He cried, but he didn't break. And when asked why he picked up the rifle, he answered the same way he had in the interview. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted them to stop hurting my dad." The silence that followed was total. Then it was Sophia's turn to bring the final blow. She reached into her binder and pulled out a printout, an internal HOA memo dated 3 days before the raid. She read it aloud, her voice clipped, clear. "Make an example out of Wilson. His military PTSD chick ruins our curb appeal." Karen. "Internal communication." Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters began scribbling furiously. One of Karen's own supporters shook their head and looked away. Karen's attorney went pale. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Is this verified?" Sophia slid a file across the table. Email server log. Metadata included. The judge scanned it for a moment, then looked at Karen, who was now stone-faced. With a slow, deliberate motion, the judge raised his gavel and brought it down with a crisp, commanding thunk. "I've heard enough. No shouting. No outbursts. Just a line drawn clean across the page." And in that moment, the courtroom knew the balance had shifted. The verdict came just after noon. The judge's tone was firm but measured. No theatrics. No dramatic pause. Just the delivery of truth long overdue. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association is found in violation of state property rights law and residential trespass regulations. The HOA's enforcement actions against the Wilson family are deemed unlawful. The associated firm will have its operating license revoked, effective immediately. Ms. Karen is hereby fined $100,000 for abuse of authority and removed from her position as HOA president. No cheers erupted in the courtroom. Just silence. Stunned, relieved silence. David sat still for a few moments, as if his body didn't quite believe what it had just heard. Sophia placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. The charges against him dropped entirely. The judge acknowledged his right to defend his home and called the HOA's actions a misuse of private power under the guise of community order. Then came the quieter victory, the one Tyler never saw coming. The custody petition filed by Melissa had also been officially dismissed. No hearings. No appeals. The judge simply noted that the situation did not warrant state intervention. But it wasn't the legal phrasing that mattered. It was what happened in the hallway after the ruling. Melissa stood there, arms crossed at first, avoiding eye contact. But when Tyler walked toward her, not as the boy who stood with a rifle, but as her son, her posture changed. She dropped to one knee and pulled him into a hug. No words. Just arms and shaking and tears she hadn't let herself show in weeks. Then she looked up at David, eyes red, voice quiet. "I was scared, but I saw him on that stand, and I saw you, and I know now. He wasn't in danger with you. He was safe." David didn't say anything, just nodded, and for the first time in a long time, they stood together, not as a couple, but as two people who both wanted what was best for the boy between them. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and bright. A small group of reporters waited at the bottom of the steps. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. But Tyler didn't flinch this time. He didn't drop his head or step behind his dad's shadow. He stood tall, right beside him. No more hiding. No more explaining. The boy who once gripped a rifle in fear now stood with his hands free and his head high, in quiet, earned dignity. 6 months later, the headlines were gone. The noise had faded, but the fence still stood, steel, straight, and unmistakably there, just like the day they finished it. No one questioned its place anymore. No more violation letters. No more raids. It was now, and officially, protected by state law. Funny how something so simple, a line in the dirt with posts and panels, could hold so much meaning. For the Wilsons, it wasn't just a fence. It was where the story began and where, in many ways, it finally came to rest. Tyler was back in school. He kept his head down for the most part, focused on classes, sat at the edge of the lunch table close to the windows. He didn't talk much about what happened that day. Most of the teachers didn't ask. Most of the kids, surprisingly, respected that. He still got looks sometimes, but fewer now. And when he did, he didn't look away. He didn't feel like a hero. And maybe that's why people started to see him as one. At home, things were different. Quieter, but stronger. He and David still grilled on Sundays. They started planting tomatoes again. And in the garage, surrounded by tools and old gear, they built something new together. A podcast. It wasn't fancy. Just a mic, a laptop, and a weekly recording. They called it Backyard Liberty. They talked about homeownership, personal rights, self-reliance, fatherhood. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was steady, honest, personal. Episode 1. What Makes a Home Worth Defending dropped on a Wednesday. In the final minutes, Tyler leaned closer to the mic. His voice was deeper now, not just because he was growing up, but because something inside him had settled. They thought we were the threat, he said, but the real danger was thinking they could take everything without a fight. There was a pause, not for effect, just to breathe. And with that, the episode ended. No outro music, just silence. A silence filled with meaning. The boy who had once stood between his father and 3 armed men hadn't become a warrior or a rebel or a legend. He became a reminder that bravery isn't always loud, and justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears small shoes and speaks with a shaking voice, but it stands, just like the fence.